You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. To Warsaw, Poland we go. Everybody's looking at the situation in Ukraine, but what happens after they get out to the Ukraine? And we're speaking right now with Jason Seamus, the CEO and Executive Vice President of the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey, who's there on a mission bringing duffel bags full of gloves, socks, hats, other supplies for refugees. And Rabbi Chaim Poupko joined us. He's a spiritual leader of Congregation Ahavath Torah of Engelwood, New Jersey. He's also a member of the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey and a member of the National Executive Committee of the Rabbinical Council of America. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thanks
you for having us. It's great to speak to you from here.
So you're in Poland right now looking over relief efforts. You went to the Ukraine, you met with different officials, different people. So let me begin with you, Jason. So tell us about what you've seen so far.
So what we've seen is an extraordinarily unique environment for at least our generation in this refugee influx from the horrors of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. And we're seeing thousands of people come across the border looking for their next phase and steps in life, and whether it's aliyah, whether it's reuniting with other family in Europe, or considering where they're gonna go, there's a shock and horror within their psyche about what just happened. Knowing that their homes have been blown up, or that they're not even allowed to live where they are, they couldn't find safety in shelters, and having to find any means possible to get to the Polish border has been incredibly eye-opening and shocking for me.
And I believe there's over 1 million refugees from Ukraine in Poland.
So it's more than that, Zev. It's actually, there's 10 million people who have been displaced by this conflict. 3.5 million people have actually made it out of the border, and about 2.5 million have made it to Poland. The other million are split between Romania and Hungary at the moment.
So you have a massive influx, and I'm glad that Poland is taking them in. But here is the situation. There's a two-part to this whole process. Number one, the first priority is you want to get them out of the Ukraine. It's dangerous, so missiles, bombs falling, people are getting killed, wounded. You want to get them out. But when you get them out, there's another problem, which maybe even be greater, is that now they came penniless. They don't have their possessions. They don't have money. You got to provide shelter, food, all kinds of provisions. Even if they make it to Israel, I believe 100,000 Jews are scheduled to go to Israel. That's what they're projecting. But there are plenty of them are going to stay in Poland and Romania and Hungary, but Poland has the biggest influx. So with Passover coming, so I'm sure it's on your mind, and that's why you're there, is to see what their needs are and what could be done for them. So let's look at that. What is being done for them?
So on a humanitarian level, of course, there's an endless need for supplies, and I'm going to defer to my friend Rabbi Poupko to talk about how they handled the supplies. On our end, our federation has so far raised almost $700,000, of which 100% is going through, and that's to help for all along the chain. There's a lot of mental health services that are needed. People coming out are completely traumatized and almost have paralysis about what to do next. In the case of those making Aliyah to Israel, we've been extremely helpful in helping them fund their way from getting out of the Ukraine into Poland, processed, and into Israel. And in some cases, we met with refugees who left with nothing. It's not even money, it's birth certificates, passports, identity papers. And you know that when you make Aliyah to Israel, you have to somewhat be able to verify that you're eligible under the law of return to come. So there's a lot of money being put into this entire process, food, medicine, etc. You mentioned Pesach is coming up, and we know that Jews celebrate the Passover holiday more than anything else, the Seder. And all of a sudden, we heard from the chief rabbi of Poland, Rabbi Shudrich, today, that they're expecting to more than double the need of what they would normally do for Passover food. And so really, and I'm begging for your listeners here to understand what I'm saying, that responsibility should fall on us who can, let them all come and eat may not necessarily this year apply to our actual home, but maybe should apply to our global Jewish home. And we're asking people to help us sponsor the ability to provide kosher for Passover food for those who are displaced here in Poland.
And we'll give out that information during the broadcast as well. Let me turn to Rabbi Chaim Poupko. First time on the program. We appreciate you being here with us. I understand you schlepped tons of duffel bags to Poland to give out.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here. And yeah, I last week I called up several Jewish leaders to talk about doing a mission to Poland. I called Rabbi David Seth Kirshner, my good friend, the rabbi of Temple Emmanuel in Kloster, and he had already begun to plan a mission. We found out quickly that we really can't bring a lot of people. We cannot stretch their resources that are really devoted to helping refugees. Rabbi Kirshner is good friends with Jonathan Ornstein, the director of the JCC of Krakow, which has completely transformed their operations there to assist refugees, helping them who are coming over the border and finding them, setting them up with all manner of services, including a place to live. But before we left, we collected from our communities, basic supplies, and we had a huge outpouring. The pictures that I have from my shul and from Rabbi Kirshner's temple of what people brought, all sorts of necessities, diapers, certain basic canned foods, toothbrushes, toothpaste, certain kinds of clothing. It's just amazing how much people, in addition to wanting to donate, they want to be able to do something with, physically, materially. And so we packed over 120 huge duffels, which were also donated. And credit to Lufthansa for letting us bring 120 duffels on the plane that all made it to Krakow. In addition to those 120 duffels of supplies that made it, we have a couple hundred more duffels worth of supplies that we couldn't bring that are still waiting in New Jersey for further efforts and other ways that we're gonna send them. We brought them all, and they're being distributed, and we are able to see how they're being distributed in Krakow, as well as we went closer to the border to one of the absorption centers, which I can tell you all about if you want. And supplies were brought there, and we know that some of these supplies were being sent into Ukraine itself. It's obviously very disorganized how to get things into Ukraine. But if somebody knows somebody who knows somebody who's going in, who's able to bring stuff, we were able to send some of our stuff into Ukraine itself as well.
Didn't you get into Ukraine? Didn't you cross the border too?
Yeah, so we visited an absorption center that was close to the border that the refugees were brought into them. It was a mall that closed down before the war even started, and it got taken over by relief efforts, and now it's a huge organized relief effort. From that absorption center, we went to the border, to one of the major border crossings. We saw people coming across, women, children, elderly. Obviously, you don't see young men, middle-aged men coming over because they're not allowed to leave Ukraine. But you see them coming over with their lives in their hands, essentially. Whatever they can pack in a few bags, they're coming over, and they have to wait in this line at the border crossing. Then they have to wait in another line. But what's been set up at these border crossings by so many different NGOs, including Israeli NGOs, is just amazing. It's such a global effort. And I actually want to make one other comment about this that we heard from several volunteers and NGO type people, and that is the government officials, local and national in Poland, aren't really taking charge on this relief effort. They're not standing in the way, of course, but in terms of organizing this effort, it is almost entirely a grassroots effort. All these different organizations come in and set up shop and learn to coordinate and organize with each other in order to provide all sorts of different services. The sense of humanity, the beautiful sense of humanity that's on display here, in the fact that all these relief efforts they're not very coordinated from the top, from the government. This is all volunteer run.
But is there an umbrella group that's working, or is everybody doing their own thing with their relief efforts?
There really is no one umbrella group. There are bigger organizations and there are smaller organizations. But Rescuers Without Borders. I'm forgetting the exact title, something Lelo Gvulot, an Israeli NGO. They came in, they set up shop right near the fence, right by the border, and they're providing medical services. And next to them is a Sikh food truck. And next to them is a group from Italy. And next to them is a group from Finland, offering all sorts of different things. It's unbelievable.
I'm going to chime in to the rabbi's
Sure,
point.
Jason.
Yeah, it's rather amazing because I do think even though there's no central governing body over it, there is coordination between the refugees and the different NGOs sitting there in these tents lined up. And there is everything set up for people coming across the border. I mean, I found two things to be mind-boggling or mind-blowing, sorry, not boggling. One, there was a tent set up for rescue pets, refugee pets. There was food, leashes, toys for all different pets, right? And then across the way, you know, the rabbi mentioned the Sikh food truck. Also to the left of that was the Jewish community of Mexico, and right next to them was the Egyptian Red Crescent. And everyone seems to be, you know, very engaged at all different levels in making these refugees feel welcome. Which leads
I also
to
want to mention, sorry, I also want to mention a group from Israel called Natan, which is working with the JDC. They set up a clinic in an absorption center. They set up a playroom for kids. And I must tell you, seeing that playroom of kids was the most heartbreaking, because here you have these kids who are laughing and smiling and playing because they're 3 years old, 5, 10, whatever it is. They have little sense of what's going on. Their lives have been totally uprooted. And here you see them just playing in this daycare that they set up.
We're speaking with Jason Chaim, the CEO and Executive Vice President of the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey, but we're speaking to him in Warsaw, Poland, where he's coordinating relief efforts. Rabbi Chaim Poupko is also a member of the Federation. He's also the spiritual leader of congregation Ahavath Torah of Engelwood, New Jersey.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
We're continuing our conversation, which I'm here in New York, but our guests are in Warsaw, Poland. Jason Chaim is the CEO and Executive Vice President of the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey. Rabbi Chaim Poupko, the spiritual leader of congregation Ahavath Torah of Engelwood. They've brought tons of supplies, and they're on a mission to help. Do we have any idea of how many Jews have gotten out so far? Because I've heard estimates that in Ukraine, prior to the war, is between 200 and 300,000 Jews. Do we have any idea how many are in Poland or Jews that have gotten out?
Yeah, so look, we estimate not quite as high as 300,000. We ballpark it at closer to 200,000. The numbers are a little sketchy because, like I said, they're spread out in places like Romania, Hungary, and mostly in Poland. What we do know is that already 5,000 people have made Aliyah in just the first 3 weeks of this conflict from Ukraine. And you compare that to 52 weeks of 2021 when 3,000 went, and you get a sense of the fact that they're estimating maybe up to 50,000 have come across, but more likely in the 30,000 give or take range, which is pretty remarkable because you have to think about the process of being displaced from your home and leaving with nothing. We've heard stories about people sitting on buses for 48 hours, traveling by train, plane, and automobile just to even get to the border. The further east you are and the closer you are to the conflict, the further your trek is to Poland, the harder it is to manage through. So there have been like multiple different levels of response on the ground within Ukraine to help these people get out. And don't forget, you know, to the rabbi's point earlier, locally, they're calling this the women and children refugee, because if you are 18 to 60 and you are an abled man, you are not allowed to leave. So we are seeing an enormous amount of women and children coming through and very few men, which is creating an additional level of anxiety in cases where husbands and fathers are left behind.
No, I could imagine. It's certainly a terrible situation. I heard that to get out of Ukraine, you can charter buses, but I heard they've gotten as much as $100,000 a bus in some cases, which is an astronomical fee. Astronomical.
No, it's really the stories. Every single story is unique and heartbreaking. The common theme of it, though, is one, the displacement part and the fear for children and food and safety and welfare. The other side, to the rabbi's point, though, is actually kind of heartwarming, and that's the fact that Poland's done a 180 in a way in the last 75, 80 years in terms of the Jewish community. And so often we've all been saying to ourselves, who would believe that this is the place Jews were coming to for safety and security? And remarkably, that is the case.
Is
We were at. Yeah.
Is the Polish government giving any assistance? Because I heard there are some financial. Are they doing anything?
The Polish government is not turning anybody away, and they are providing for some measure of healthcare for people who are staying longer. And they have generally made it very accessible in terms of allowing buses to be used to transit people who make it across the border that we were at, to get to transit points, to get to hotels and other places where they're staying. So we have not met with government officials because of the time constraint, but the feedback we're getting from the locals on the ground is that the Polish government, even though it's considered a nationalist government, has been very supportive at the moment.
Well, thank God for that. Now, part of your mission, both you and the rabbi and leaders have met with the Israeli ambassador to Poland and Israeli officials. Tell us about that, about your meetings with them.
Zev, I just want to go back to one thing. I'm sorry, before
Sure.
because you mentioned like all the different unique stories. I must tell you this amazing story. We met a young woman, Anna, in Krakow, who is a refugee from Ukraine. She came with her two young children. She's not Jewish. She fled Ukraine early on because she had a friend in Krakow that she could go to. She drove 12 hours to get to the border. It took her 48 hours waiting in line to get across the border. And then when she got to Krakow, her friend told her about the JCC of Krakow, and she went there for support, for services, and now she's volunteering there as well because she's an English teacher. But you're not going to believe this.
Wow. Go ahead.
She told us, we met with her, she told us that her great grandmother in the Ukraine hid a Jewish family. Her great grandparents hid a Jewish family for a number of years during the war, and her grandmother told her this, and she believes that she is getting all this support from the Jewish community in Krakow in merit that God rewarded her family because they Jews during the war.
Amazing stories. As a goggle goes there, the wheel turns. And there are other stories of, I think there was a famous story of a Ukrainian who got to Israel, and I believe who also sheltered. In fact, they in Israel welcomed somebody whose family saved their family during the Holocaust. So it's just interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we met someone in Warsaw today, who was rescued only a day ago from Ukraine. She reached out to the Jewish community. She had someone reach out to the Jewish community in Warsaw because her grandparents are registered as righteous Gentiles at Yad Vashem. And so the Jewish effort in Warsaw said, we will absolutely help you. Come on over. And we met her at one of the hotels in Warsaw that the Jewish Agency is operating out of.
From a theological perspective, God rewards those that do good. May not happen tomorrow, but happens over the course of time. And what you brought up is definitely an example of that. So an important one. Jason, I just want to get back to the Israeli presence and what they're doing. And I know you met with the Israeli ambassador and others. Tell us about it.
So look, the Israeli government is working hand in hand with the Jewish Agency to make it easier for people to make Aliyah. There's an entire processing department now on the third floor of this hotel, and there's 4 hotels that are being used around town by the Jewish Agency to do this. Because you have to remember, the Israeli government has basically contracted out Aliyah to the Jewish Agency, but they work hand in hand because you need the Prime Minister's office and everyone else to sign off on all of the great work that they're doing. The other thing that they've done, which was rather remarkable, is they have reduced any bureaucracy and red tape with regard to volunteers coming from Israel to Ukraine. And specifically, I'm going to give a shout out to Beilinson Hospital and some other medical centers in Israel where doctors are coming volunteering, and now there's a wait list where they each come for a week here to treat patients. So I think the Israeli government's role in this is pretty significant, considering they're caught in a rather tight spot between Russia and Ukraine. They are doing what they can here to alleviate it. And that raises one other thing I just want to remind listeners about, is that we've been heavily focused on the Ukrainian Jewish community and the refugees. We should not lose sight of the nearly 500,000 Russian Jews who are living within the Russian borders. And while they're not being displaced from their home, they are on a heightened sense of anxiety and alert about their own station in life and what comes next and how they support and who they support. And so we're monitoring that as well.
Are you planning to do relief for them as well?
So it's a little bit trickier because Russia has essentially been cut off from the rest of the Western world at this point. But there are people representing the Jewish community on the ground in places like Moscow and St. Petersburg and others, just keeping an eye on how things are going. But it's not insignificant given that Putin has generally been supportive of Russian Jewry, but now there's a huge threat with the Ukrainian Jewry.
Just to add to what Jason said about the Israeli government and the operations that they set up for processing people for Aliyah, what's amazing, we met them today, is that the embassy officials from the Israeli embassy in Kiev from the Ukraine are now here. They fled Ukraine and now they're here processing Ukrainian Jews, which makes sense because they're familiar with, they speak Ukrainian and they can help them.
They've relocated to these hotels. It's amazing what has been accomplished.
No, a lot you've done, and thank you. A lot more has to be done, which leads me to my next question. With Passover coming, it's a question of not just money, but you got to get matzahs, you got to get kosher for Passover food. Where is it being made? How it's going to be distributed? Because now you have a lot more people to give out to, people who ordinarily would have gotten on their own. I'm not sure what the supply was in Ukraine about Pesach food, but I assume that you're starting from scratch.
Well, I mean, it's really like, let's be honest, it's going to have to come from Israel. Rabbi Shudrich, made the point, like, if planes are coming here to take people back to Israel, then they can certainly bring the supplies with them. And that's part of the Israeli government effort as well. The key for those of us not directly involved, the way to really help is to charitably underwrite and support that effort. But you're right. The production for those things here simply doesn't exist.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, listen, they're just beginning to start to talk about Pesach. Right now, they're just recovering from absorbing that initial wave of refugees. But I would imagine, given Pesach's message about caring for strangers, there is going to be an enormous response and effort, both from Israel and America, to make sure that people who are living a Pesach experience right now are able to enjoy and celebrate and internalize its messages.
Because they expect, I'm hearing that there may be shortages in the United States of meats and other Passover products. So I don't know what the status in Israel with the supply chain that affects the global economy and production of foods. So I'm not sure. So we're getting it from Israel, which I think is great. Right, Poupko, are you going to be sending any matzahs from New Jersey, from Engelwood, or any other supplies? I know you have lots of duffel bags yet to go to Poland to help out the refugees.
We just started talking about a project which we haven't even we just talked about it in the bus an hour ago. So Jason, you'll stop me if I'm saying too much, but myself, Rabbi Kirshner, and Jason just talked about how we want to do a campaign so that people can sponsor individuals attendance at the Sidarim in Warsaw, so that we can, if it makes sense to send matzah, we'll send matzah. But if it makes more sense to send money to make sure that people have matzah, the Bergen County Jewish community is going to make sure that there are Pesach Seders for everyone in Warsaw.
So Jason, if people want to help out, they want to make sure that people have a Seder, their food. And as you correctly pointed out, there are people who are coming that may have been affluent in Ukraine. They have not a penny to their names. They don't have the passports. They don't have the money. They don't have whatever they were enjoying. They're starting from scratch. They don't have a home. They need shelter. They need everything. They need the basics, which is what you're providing and others are providing for them. So people who are listening or watching us, how can people help to make sure people have the food for Pesach, have the necessities?
I'm going to make a pretty strong appeal here because we, like the rabbi said, I got to be in my bonnet Monday night, and we just sort of we're talking about this on this 5-minute bus ride. But ideally, if I had my druthers, every member of the Jewish community who has not already contributed supplies or money already to either the joint effort or our campaign, to think about the fact that $50 helps feed one person for a Seder. I would like to see as many people contribute to that as humanly possible. Not the same top of the pyramid that always gives to it, but everybody. Imagine, I have this image of my uncle as a kid and my dad when we would rotate Seders, always sort of doing a tongue-in-cheek thing on, for all those who are hungry, let them come and eat. I don't see why we can't make that a thematic for people, our Jewish family around the world, even if it's not our house. And so if you wanted to go to our federation website and you want to make a gift and you want to write $50 specifically for Passover food Seder, we will make sure 100% of what we collect goes. You don't have to do $50. If you want to underwrite a family of 4, you can do the math. But I think that there's nothing that says the power of the Jewish collective than those of us in the States who can do this, helping those refugees who are part of our global family participate in something similar. It's normalcy. It sets them up in so many different ways for a different experience and something positive. I don't see how we don't do this.
So let's
just to expand on what Jason said for a quick second, I'm sorry, but when he talked about the significance of how we celebrate the holiday, the Rambam Maimonides in his Code of Jewish Law teaches us exactly how to celebrate a holiday. If we celebrate a holiday just with our families sitting around the table, that is called Simchat Kreso. That is celebrating our stomachs. That's celebrating just for us. But if we celebrate the holiday by making sure that people who don't have are able to celebrate the holiday, that is how to celebrate Yontif. That is how to celebrate Pesach. And that is how we have to celebrate Pesach this year, by making sure that everyone is celebrating, especially those who are currently refugees.
So let's make it easier for people. So let me start with you, Jason. Where can people contribute? Where can people sign up to be part of it?
www.jfnnj.org, and that's essentially Jewish Federation, Northern New Jersey.org.
One more time. People may not have gotten it the first time.
jfnnj.org.
I want to thank you for your, maybe we have to do a telethon or a radiothon as well to help out because this is not going away. This is going to be, unfortunately, going on for a while. Could be for a long time too, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you, Jason Sheamus, the CEO and Executive Vice President of the Jewish Federation, Northern New Jersey, for being here with us. Rabbi Chaim Poupko, first time, hope not the last time, you join us more often. We enjoy having you on. He's the spiritual leader congregation Ahavath Torah of Engelwood, New Jersey, and we're speaking to them. They're in Warsaw, Poland, to coordinate, to bring supply and goods and to see firsthand what exactly is transpiring on the ground. So thank you for being there, for looking out and to making sure that people will have as much provisions as can, especially with the upcoming Passover holiday.
Amen. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Thank you so much. It's really an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful work that you're both doing. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.